Fred Grandy joins me. All right, Fred. Fred, first of all, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Fred, we're in Boston and doing research on you. Come to believe that I'm speaking to a very well-educated individual right now.
Well, if you're talking about going to Harvard, that's the illusion I would always try to create.
Is that it's an illusion? They wouldn't let me step foot on the campus.
Well, that may be a blessing. I'm not sure. I was there doing most of the campus unrest of the late '60s. So,
right.
I got a real political education, but in terms of my degree, I probably have the equivalent of a junior college education.
Yeah, Harvard's not what it used to be. Put it that way.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't when I was there either, and that's been some time ago.
Right. So this is what, 66 to 70, I believe?
I graduated in 70, right.
And, how did you make the foray into becoming an actor?
Oh, I don't think I was ever anything but that, Mike. I was precocious as a kid. My parents probably would have said bratty. But it was just something that I always kind of wanted to do. I was disabused of that notion, unfortunately, when I got to Harvard because, everybody was going to be a lawyer or do something important.
Right.
And so I deviated, I think, from my career path for a while. But it just didn't last too long. And, I obviously began in New York and then moved out to Hollywood and wound up doing the show. And then really left the business for about 25 years. I was a member of Congress for 8 years. Right. I was the president of Goodwill Industries for about 6 years. I had a talk radio show in Washington for about 8 years. But I've returned to my first love. I've been back pretty squarely in the business for about the last 5 years now. And as a matter of fact, my Love Boat castmate, Ted Lange, and I just did a production of I'm Not Rappaport at the Red House Theater in Syracuse. And that was, not to toot my own horn, but it was phenomenally successful. And we're looking to move it now. So we're having discussions with other producers and places because apparently there are a lot of people, maybe your mom's still one, that want to see a Gopher and Isaac reunion.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there. What do you, a lot of people prefer, what do you prefer? The television, because, television, hurry up and wait. Movies, hurry up and wait. In terms of, do you love the stage more than television, or which one more do you like?
Well, I've always said acting is acting. There are a lot of people that say, well, I'm a film actor or I'm a stage actor, but there are obviously variations on the technique. But what you really need to know as an actor is how to make whatever you have to say believable. Now, at this point in my life, I think I prefer being on stage a little bit more because actors have more control on stage than they ever do in television or film. Obviously, they're not privy to the final cut. They're frequently not involved in the creation of the script. In television, for sure, there's very little rehearsal. So for me, the whole process of putting together a play like I'm Not Rappaport, or a year ago I did on Golden Pond with my daughter, it's something that I think I got back to because when I really distilled everything out, what I missed about acting was practicing the craft, and that's what I'm doing now.
Fred, in 1975, you play Herman the German in Death Race 2000 with David.
Oh my God, I'm hanging up right now. You're going to have to continue this conversation with my lawyer.
Oh my goodness, with David Carradine and Sylvester Stallone.
That's right.
That was a Roger Corman film, if I'm not mistaken.
It was, and it was a typical Roger Corman film. We shot the entire thing at the Ontario Speedway and the Pasadena Civic Center. And when they wanted to change the set, they just moved some chairs around. I think we shot the whole thing in 2 weeks. He edited it in another week, released it in the fourth week, and made his money back in his fifth week.
Oh,
So, that typical,
right.
typical Roger Corman, right?
It sounds like Roger Corman. Strangely enough, do you remember what Sylvester Stallone was doing in his trailer when you were speaking with him?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, this being a Roger Corman movie, there weren't a whole lot of perks, even for actors.
Did you have did you at least have craft services?
I think we did have somebody making coffee, but we had this kind of collective or cooperative Winnebago where we would all meet in the morning. It was kind of our rolling green room, and Stallone quickly named it the Cafe Winnebago. And we would sit in there and just schmooze until we were called to the set. And I had known Sylvester because we had actually done a commercial together in New York years ago. And so we were chatting, and one day I said, "Well, so what are you going to do when this is over?" He says, "Well, I'm writing a movie." I said, "Really? What's it about?" He said, "Yeah, there's a picture about a fighter. Just what we need, another picture about a fighter, right?" Of course, that was Rocky. So
wow.
So this was a little before his meteoric rise, but he was a lovely guy, and everybody seemed to get along. Carradine was a little aloof. He wasn't really part of the group, but of course he had the most to do in the movie, so maybe he needed his own quiet space.
Yeah, right. Some guys have all the luck. I mean, it's a cliche, but in this case, you briefly played the love interest of Adrian Barbeau in Maude. I mean,
that's right.
How was that?
That's right. Well, it was not bad. No, it was not bad at all. But it was. You got to understand, Mike. I'm a professional.
That's completely
above board. And the press probably only has a vivid imagination and a couple of photographs. But anyway, I was a young actor in New York, and I had been doing a 2-character play with James Woods.
Oh wow,
Jimmy Woods, and we had gotten quite a lot of notoriety about the show. And one of Norman Lear's casting people came to see me and asked me to come out to Hollywood to test for this role of Adrian Barbeau's boyfriend. And I was just, I was a babe in the woods. I had no idea what to expect. So I went out there and I tested and I met everybody, and I got the job, and I was on the show for a year. And the great thing for me was being around really monumental talents like B. Arthur, and of course Adrian was a pretty big deal too.
Yeah,
she'd been in. I'd actually seen her in Greece in New York, and she was a lovely woman. I mean, we got along very well. But there were people like Rue McClanahan and Conrad Bain and Esther Roll and Bill Macy, and for a young guy like me, it was an ongoing tutorial. Plus, obviously, you're working for Norman Lear too, who ain't no slouch either, right?
My goodness, as an actor, it's very difficult to get a role. It's just it's a tough business, and people are fascinated by the whole fame thing. But there's a lot of, it's not easy. It's not easy as an actor. The next day, you're always looking for work, even if you get an Oscar. The next day.
Believe me, I've got 2 kids in the business, so I see this from a lot of different angles.
It's true. It's very, very different, very hard business, and some people are fascinated too much by the fame of it. And it's not like you're working for the post office where it's steady work.
No, and my experience has been that the people who do it really because they have to do it. It's kind of some kind of amalgam of a blessing, a calling, and a curse. You got to do it because you have to do it. And I found myself gravitating back to it after I'd pretty much completed everything I wanted to do in politics and elsewhere. And as I say, I've not regretted getting back into the business. Now, fortunately, at this point in my life, unlike a lot of young actors, and I got to tell you, Mike, it's a lot tougher for young actors today than it was for me. And I think the reason for that is, Yes, there is more work. Obviously, we've got cable, we've got Netflix, we've got more places to work,
more platforms, right?
More platforms, but the level of pay is so much lower that you can have a steady gig on a television series on cable or a streaming service, and still have to take another job. I mean, it's very hard. Back in what was really, I think, now kind of the golden age of television, when Love Boat was on, there were 3 networks. Fox hadn't even been created. And if you got on a television series, even if it lasted for 13 episodes, you knew you were going to be able to make enough money probably to pay for your rent and your car and your health insurance for at least a year or two. And now you can't say that.
Right. Speaking of television series, Fred, and paying the bills, you did a television series for NBC in 1976 called Monster Squad.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite jobs, to tell you the truth.
Now, I mean, how was that? Because, it was very short-lived, but the list of people that guest starred on it, Edward Andrews, Marty Allen, Frank Caddy, Alice Ghostley, Jonathan Harris, and Vito Scotti. Yeah. I mean, such a great ensemble of guest stars.
Yeah, I think Avery Schreiber did the show. Julie Newmar did the show.
Oh, yes, Julie Newmar.
Well, first of all, this was the brainchild of a guy named Billy D'Angelo, who had produced the Batman series with Adam West. And it was very similar. We had one set and they just repainted it every week. It was a half-hour comedy, which we usually shot in 2 days. We did 13 episodes, and I think we did them all in a month. I mean, it was lickety-split. But it was very funny. It was very hip. And we found out that even though it was not probably targeted to the right audience because it was a Saturday morning show, and by that time I think the audience out there had become so acclimated to watching animation and cartoons that live action on Sunday morning seemed a little foreign to them. But it was a tremendous hit with a lot of burned out frat boys who were waking up from the night before and saying, "Whoa, this is really cool. Those dudes are cool."
Yeah, right, man.
And so it had a kind of cult following, and I enjoyed it a great deal. And in terms of the guest stars, I didn't know it at the time, but it was obviously, for me, kind of a preview of things to come once I started on Love Boat.
Absolutely. I mean, for those people who don't know, I think some of them are floating around online somewhere. You play Walt. I mean, a night watchman who brings back Frankenstein and Wolfman and Dracula back to life.
Yeah, and I dressed like Pat Boone. I had white bucks and a bow tie and a cardigan sweater.
Yeah, the regular guy look.
Yeah, that's right. The regular guy back then. You wouldn't be caught dead wearing that stuff now.
Oh, my goodness. It's actually Easy Money was on a couple weeks ago, and he had the regular guy look, Rodney.
Yeah.
Let's segue into the Love Boat. And
sure.
Such an amazing show. I'm sure he's tired even hearing about it, but it was such a great show. And I had a dear friend of yours on last week, Gavin MacLeod, and what a doll.
Yeah.
What a doll.
Yeah, and Gavin was the only guy when we first began the show who was absolutely convinced and could not be dissuaded from his belief that this was going to be a monster hit. The rest of us thought, well, I don't know. You remember the series Love American Style?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the word on Love Boat when it first premiered was, this is Love American Style on a boat. This will never work. Gavin was a true believer from Jump Street and was absolutely proven right. And the only other true believer really was Aaron Spelling, who never deviated from his absolute conviction that this was going to be not just a hit, but a third world power, which it became. And I really think that because Gavin, who had in his career lived in the shadows as a very competent but clearly supporting actor for people like Ernie Borgnine on McHale's Navy and Mary Tyler Moore and Ed Asner on the Mary Show, that for him to kind of emerge as the first among equals on Love Boat was something that always kept him very mindful of his perspective. He never got too big for that show. As a matter of fact, nobody did. We never had any of the...
No divas.
We had no divas, and we had none of the backstabbing or behind-the-scenes warfare that we'd hear about from other people who guested on shows.
I want more money. I'm the star. I gave that kind of garbage. You and Ted Lange first met outside an audition room on the bench, waiting to go into the Love Boat. Is that to go to the audition for the Love Boat? Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. Although I didn't realize until much, much later that the only person who was there to audition was me. Ted already had the job.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Because he'd already had a couple of series, and I have to tell you that when I walked into the room to meet the Mucky Mucks, Monster Squad was really not cutting it for me. You know what I'm saying? But Ted had a couple of shows that the network had already put on, and he was a commodity. And even though I was there to read and to screen test, I think he was there just to be measured for his costume.
Do you know if anybody else was cast for the roles?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, we made 3 pilots. So the original Gopher, none of us were in the original pilot.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know that.
The original Gopher was a guy named Sandy Helberg, whose son, Simon Helberg, of course, is on Big Bang Theory and has become a star in his own right.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
But they made a pilot with a cast that was a gopher and a bartender and a doctor. You know who the original doctor was before Bernie Coppell?
Oh, crap, I should know this. No,
I
don't. I should know this.
Dick Van Patten.
Yes. Correct. Yeah. All right.
And then I honestly don't know who the first captain was.
I don't think there was. Well, yeah, there was. I mean.
No, there was.
Right, there was. But
we went through we went through 2 captains before we got to Gavin. And Lauren Tweez, the woman who played Julie, was not hired until the day before we started shooting the pilot.
I believe Aaron Spelling's wife saw her in an episode of Charlie's Angels.
Yeah, you got that right. And at the time, she was a waitress on Sunset Avenue.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing how stuff happens. It really is.
Well, that's the Hollywood mythology.
Yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Because Gavin he said when he got, Aaron just gave him the part. He didn't have to audition for it.
No. And at that point, ABC was run by Fred Silverman, the man with the golden gut. And one of the reasons he was so successful is because Aaron kept producing one hit right after another. Heart to Heart and Charlie's Angels and Starsky and Hutch was huge at that time.
Huge.
So when Aaron came in for the 3rd pilot and laid hands on Love Boat, all of a sudden something that the networks had been really more than a little embarrassed and sheepish about suddenly became a hot topic. And but even so, even with his prestige and his ability to spin straw into gold, the networks were really not convinced Love Boat was going to be a hit, and they really produced the show, I think, more as a favor to him than anything else. And so everybody, save Aaron and save Gavin, was flabbergasted when the show was as enormous a success as it was.
Now, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong. When your agent called you for the audition, he was sort of embarrassed to even tell you about it or even send you. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't say he was embarrassed, but I had this wonderful agent named Mike Greenfield, who he is a classic Hollywood stereotype. I'm not even sure these guys exist anymore. I mean, he had this tiny little office on Sunset Boulevard, and everybody was baby sweetheart, and he never listened to a word you said because he was talking a mile a minute.
Right.
And he said, and here's how it happened. He calls me up and he says, "Hey, Freddie, listen, you got to go in and do this thing. It's a deal for Doug Kramer. I hate Doug Kramer, but you'd be good in this thing. And so you go in there and this thing is not going to run, but go do it. Could be good for you. So I go into the initial audition, and then a week or so later, I was out running some errands, and I came back, and my wife was standing in the driveway with my blazer. And she said, "You got to put this on and go back to," I think it was Paramount where they were casting this thing. And she said, "You've got a screen test for this thing, Love Boat." And she said, "Mike just called and said, you got to get there in 45 minutes. So I went and I got, they cashed me. And his attitude was, okay, so you've got this. This is going to be good. You're gonna get this cruise. It's gonna be good. The thing will never run. It'll never run. But now you got a pilot. So we're building. This is gonna be good. So don't worry about it. But don't worry. This thing will never run. It's a dog. It's awful. So,
it's a dog.
Yeah.
It's a Titanic.
So I was not preparing to send my laundry out until the second year.
Wow. Yeah. Maybe you get a free cruise out of it, right?
We got more than one of those.
Yeah, amazing. Love Boat obviously was such a huge hit. Was there ever a point when you said, you know what, this thing is huge?
I think it kind of crept up on us. I mean, we obviously made the show, and the network's expectations for it were minimal, because the worst time slot in television, at least back in those days, was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, which is where they put us, which was really considered to be the water closet of the ABC schedule. We were on opposite Carol Burnett, so it was really perceived as a mercy killing. But the show that died was Burnett. We knocked Burnett off.
I know, unbelievable.
So it obviously it took off very quickly, but even so, in this tempestuous, mercurial, topsy-turvy world of television ratings, nobody really believed what they were seeing until we were picked up for a new season midway through our first season. And that was astonishing.
Because initially, in the beginning, the critics really panned it.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was considered it'll sink like the Titanic, and it was never a critical hit. I mean, the critics were always contemptuous of it, and thought it was banal and silly and not worth their time. But America loved it, and they kept showing their love for the show year after year. I think I'd have to say we knew we were into something more than just a successful run. And I guess this would have been the third year when they said, we're planning a trip. And I can't remember where it was. I think the first big trip we took was to Australia, but I'm not sure. But once we knew that we were going global and going around the world, we said, this thing obviously has wings.
Right, because I think it aired in like 82 countries, and
at least, yeah.
You guys were like the.
We were a huge hit. We were a huge hit in places that you never would have been. You never would have expected. And I assume it still runs in these places. I mean, I get a check for $11 from Zimbabwe about every 2 months.
We'll take it.
Yeah, sure.
Hell yeah. Did you guys ever know the guest stars that were going to be on for that week beforehand?
Sometimes, they'd tip us off. We'd get a clue. But because it was such a huge roster of stars,
right? Amazing.
You wouldn't necessarily know everyone. I mean, unless they were particularly excited about somebody coming on the show.
I mean, I think there was like 32 Academy Award winners on the show.
Well, at least. I mean, Aaron was very keen on getting old film stars, Greer Garson,
Olivia
de Havilland. That's
Mickey
what I meant
Rooney,
to say.
Ann Miller, Ginger Rogers, Douglas Fairbanks Jr.
Yeah, no, all of those people.
Amazing.
Helen Hayes did the show.
Wow. What the hell? Frank Sinatra Jr., Gene Kelly, Vincent Price.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah, Gene Kelly went with us to China. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And Vincent was lovely. Vincent did the show more than once. I mean, he was a great raconteur, and you know, even as prominent as he was, and as well respected and articulate and urbane, he was so down to earth. You know, you could talk to him about anything.
How was it to have Ethel Mermen as your mom on the show?
Oh, this was another example of a woman who, you know, is considered to be in most cases a shrine to those of us in the business, and larger than life, and yet she was very down to earth. You know, she was in her mid-60s at that point, and was happy to have the work. But I'll tell you one story. My daughter, who is now a singer and an actress, and was, I think, maybe 10 or 11 when we were doing the Love Boat, the episode that Ethel was first on. And she had very early on become a real devotee of musicals. And of course, so Ethel Mermen was like a goddess to her.
Oh, my goodness.
So I came home and I said, hey, guess who's going to be on the show next week? And she said, who? And I said, Ethel Mermen. And she said, no. And I said, yeah. And she said, oh. And I said, do you want to meet her? And she goes, oh, okay. And so I took her out of school, and, you know, we arrived in the makeup room at about 6 a.m. because that's when she was getting made up. And, you know, Ethel was a very stately woman, but nobody looks too great at 6 o'clock in the morning. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
So she's sitting in a chair with her wig on. I mean, her skull cap on, because they're going to put her wig on, and it's mildly frightening. And so I walk into the room with my daughter, who's kind of trembling, and I say, Ethel, I want you to meet my daughter, Mariah. She's a huge fan of yours, and I brought her to work today so she could just say hi to you. And Ethel wheeled around in the makeup chair and looked her right in the eye and said, call me Grandma.
Wow. Well,
and my daughter has never forgotten that. That's like emblazoned into her skull.
Yeah, like I told Gavin when he came on the show last week, I said that, you know, the Love Boat was like the Ed Sullivan show on the high seas.
That's a very good way to describe it. But, you know, there were a lot of people on that show that, you know, we had a lot of people who were coming up in their careers and a lot of people who were coming down. I mean, you have a guy like Tom Hanks who was in a show called Bosom Buddies, which was just beginning to take off, but he had really not become the film star that he eventually became. And then you had people like Ray Bolger and others who were icons, but let's face it, weren't getting a lot of calls, you know, I mean.
Absolutely.
And so when the show reached out to these people, they jumped at the chance to be on it. And plus, by the time a lot of them arrived, everybody knew it was a great work experience. And if you were really lucky, you could, you know, catch on to one of the shows that was attached to a cruise. So you might be going to the Mediterranean or China or Paris. So it became the ultimate paid vacation for people in the business.
Because I think Gavin told a story about, I forget who the actress was. She was she was a Broadway star, and, you know, in the London stage and Broadway, and she been on it for like 60 years. And she says, you know, why would you do this show? And she says, you know, Gavin, so many people have seen me in this show on a Saturday night than see me in my entire career on the stage in one night. You know,
yeah, I'm trying to remember who that was.
I forget who it was.
It may have been Ann Miller, or it may have been. Well, it was not Carol Channing. I know that.
No.
I'm not sure. Maybe it might have been Alexis Smith.
Maybe
it might have been Alexis Smith.
It rings a bell.
But that's true. I mean, back then, of course, and this is another thing about television at the time, Mike, is that we had a captive audience.
Right.
There weren't that many choices, so that, you know, even if we didn't get a huge share on Saturday night, it would be 10 times what your average cable show gets these days.
Right. Right.
So she's, you know, she's absolutely right. She could run in Hello Dolly for the rest of her life and still not have as many people see her as she would on an episode of Love Boat.
Amazing. I mean, like, you know, like Johnny Carson would, you know, he was the king of late night, obviously, but there was only like 3 or 4 channels too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right.
You know, you can't get numbers like that no more. Unfortunately, it's just a different world, and you
know, no, nobody expects it.
Were you ever starstruck? I mean, we're all like we talked about all those amazing stars that came on. Was there anybody that said, "Oh my God, there's so and so"?
Well, I wouldn't say I was ever.
Right.
I was ever starstruck. I mean, Ted Lange and I very early on decided that we would mine the gold that was being presented every week with some of these old vaudevillians and Broadway stars. So we'd take a guy like Jack Guilford to lunch, or you know, a Ray Bolger, and we would just ask him to tell stories. And of course, that was terribly flattering to them. So we just collected their lore, and quite honestly, we were talking about this when we were doing I'm Not Rappaport in Syracuse. You know, people. I was playing an old Jewish guy in Central Park, an 80-year-old Jewish guy, and you know, it was something of a stretch for me because I'm an Episcopalian from Iowa. All right, but because I had studied at the feet of Milton Berle and Buddy Hackett and Shecky Green, and all of these people that Red Buttons, I mean, otherwise known as Adam Chwat. You know, I had listened to these guys for years and years and years, heard all of their rhythms, and knew exactly where their origins were. The Catskills, vaudeville, burlesque, radio, and that's, you know, that's an advanced degree that you couldn't get at any graduate school in theater in the world.
Amazing. You know, my audience, a lot of my people in my audience probably do not know this, but maybe you can tell my audience, there was a very horrible day in Turkey. Can you tell my audience what happened that day?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, we were shooting in Turkey, and we were being entertained actually by the Turkish government in a little seaside resort town called Izmir. And we had this soiree that was taking place on this hilltop, these cliffs that were looking down into the, I guess it would be the Aegean Sea. Beautiful night. But some of us decided we'd go back to the ship, and we had all these party balloons. And so we decided we'd take some party balloons, and we got into a cab. And at the time I was smoking, and one of my cigarette actually touched one of these party balloons. Well, you know, party balloons are filled with helium, which is an inert gas, so you just get a pop. Except in Turkey. In Turkey, they filled their party balloons with hydrogen.
Oh, my goodness.
So the car blew up. I mean, had the windows been closed or the engine been on, we would have been killed.
Wow.
But as it was, I had severe third-degree burns on my hands and face. I was the worst affected by it. And so that became a huge story. And I finished working. I mean, I still had one more show to do. We had another 2-hour movie that we did in Italy that I was able to do, although they bandaged me up. But when I got back to LA, I went to a burn unit for 6 months.
Oh my God! I didn't know that.
So yeah, so it was pretty scary. But everybody was very supportive, and you know, there is one. I'll tell you this one story, which is kind of scary but kind of funny.
Yeah.
We were actually, we weren't on one of the Princess cruises because at that point they had not built enough ships to get into the Mediterranean. They weren't as big a powerhouse as they are now. So we were actually on a Greek ship. And so they raced me back to the infirmary on the Greek ship that we were on. And the guy who was the ship's doctor, who I'd seen periodically and was always kind of hanging around the set and enjoying being around, you know, the actors and the celebrities. But apparently, as I was being hauled into the infirmary, supposedly to get an IV and to be treated for my wounds, this Greek doctor sidles up to the producer and says, I have a confession to make. I am not a physician. This is a guy who was a medical student who had lied his way onto the ship to meet girls.
Oh, my goodness.
So, I mean, he didn't even know how to put in an IV.
Put a Band-Aid on. He
put a Band-Aid. Fortunately, our makeup man was a junkie, so I got the medication I needed. But I mean, that gives you an example of the kind of seat of the pants thing that we dealt with at the time.
Wow.
Now, of course, ships have complete. I won't call them hospitals, but they've got clinics.
You played a ship's purser. What is the title? What does he do at ship's purser?
Well, essentially, he's the head of the hotel.
Okay, forgive my ignorance.
Yeah, of course, when I ran for Congress in Iowa, I told everybody, well, you know, I was the chief financial officer, so don't worry about the budget or anything with me. I'll know what I'm doing. But normally, the purser is the highest ranking guy in the hotel. Of course, the captain rules overall because he's in charge of the line crew and all of the navigation. But all of the hotel services, up to and including the food and beverage and rooms and events and whatever, are really the purser's the purser's responsibility. So it's a huge job.
Did you know that before you got the part of the love boat?
Had no clue.
Right.
You know, this was all foreign to me. And as I say, I'm a young kid. I'm getting a break on a TV show, and I just want to know my lines and where my marks were.
You know, what was so beautiful about the Love Boat, with the romance and the escape for people that watched the show. I mean, it was a family show, and it was clean, and family watched. In the parlor.
Which people don't do anymore, by the way.
Right. Like I was telling Gavin, I mean, we used to sit around my entire family in the parlor room, and everybody used to get together and watch it. It was appointment television, and it was clean. They would put a "Do Not Disturb" sign on the door to give that allure of, you make up your own mind what happened,
Sure. Yeah.
And
but your point is well taken, because it was not just appointment television. It was family gathering television. Mm. When I meet people who remember the show, they almost always remember watching it with either their mother and father, or their sister or brother, or their grandfather or their aunt. So there was a kind of communal feeling around the television. It was almost like a hearth. You were warming yourselves in front of this TV.
Yeah, you escaped. Then after that, they put Fantasy Island, and you escaped even more.
But you don't have that anymore, because first of all, people don't watch television together. I mean, hell, they don't even eat together.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was very much a product of its time, and I don't know if we'll get that back.
No,
at all. But I think one of the things that made the show a hit was the fact that it allowed any clan you were in, whether it was your family or your sorority or your team, to sit down and watch the show. And it didn't even matter what country you were in.
Yeah, no, it was a great show, and like I said, great family show. And real quick, because oh my God, time flies. So many great stars from the golden age of Hollywood. They came on 3, 4, 5 times. Was there that one star that you were like, oh, I love this person when they come on? I mean, who was your favorite?
Well,
so many.
Obviously, I have to defer to somebody like Ethel Mermen, who played my mother and did a couple of shows.
Goodness.
But I had a lot of people that I revered. Vincent Price was a lovely guy.
Was Don Amici? Did Don Amici come on?
No, Don. I did How to Succeed in Business with Don on a tour back in 1983. Don never did the show, but the only reason I did How to Succeed is because I was on Love Boat and I was in this tour. But to give you an idea of how this business turns around. When we toured in How to Succeed in 1983, I was billed above Don Amici because at that point, nobody remembered him. Now, this was before Trading Places and Cocoon. And his revitalized career.
Right, his Oscar-winning performance.
He was a lovely guy. We'd go out to dinner almost every night after the show, and he'd tell me stories. And so he was, as far as I'm concerned, he was an adjunct professor for the Love Boat because even though he never did the show, the only reason I got to know him is because I did the show.
How was George Kennedy? One of my favorites.
You know what? I don't really have a very strong memory of George Kennedy because I for one reason or another, I don't think I was too involved in the episode that he did. So I'm probably the wrong cast member to talk about George Kennedy.
How about Scatman Crothers?
Oh, well, Scat I knew very well because the show that Scat did, I wrote.
Oh, wow.
Scatman played an old Negro League baseball player. And it was a show that I originally wrote. Bernie and I actually wrote this show for Ted Lange in the first season because we felt he wasn't getting enough to do on the show. So we wrote him this episode about an old black ball player who comes on the ship and, he's one of these guys who kind of shuffles around and does the ham bone and Isaac is trying to romance this black history professor who looks at this old ball player and thinks, this guy is a disgrace to the race. And then you learn that he was essentially the Satchel Paige of his era. Oh, so wow. It was a fun, and of course Scatman ate it up. He was wonderful,
wow.
And so.
Did you guys ever get seasick on was there a bad trip to Alaska?
There was a terrible trip where we had, I think we had 60-mile-an-hour winds and 30-foot swells.
Wow.
And it was, I think we were sailing from San Francisco to Vancouver, which was not normally something that we did, but they wanted to get on the ship before they got up to British Columbia, and it turned out to be a disaster. I mean, they were actually laying barf bags in the stairwells because they knew people wouldn't get up and down the stairs without using it. So it was pretty grim. But it was all over in about 24 hours.
Well, Fred, this has been great, and you're one of my favorites. I've had Bernie on, Gavin on, yourself. I still got to get Ted on.
He'll do it.
Yeah, and
and he'll do it because we want to promote our new show.
Okay, maybe you can give me his number. I'm gonna blast this on social media, and I'll blast your play out there too as well.
Terrific.
Folks, the great Fred Grandy. Check him out in his new play with the great Ted Lange. Imagine that they're back at it again, and check them out. Hopefully that'll be coming possibly a tour, right?
Yeah, we hope so. We're just in negotiations right now, Mike. So hopefully coming to a theater near you.
Excellent. Fred, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. This has been great, and I'd love to take a walk down memory lane with yourself and all the great stories from the golden age.
Yeah. It was golden.
Yes, it sure was. Fred, we will talk to you down the road. Thank you again, and continued success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, folks, there you have it, the great Fred Grandy, Gopher from the Love Boat. And that's what we do on this show. We pull at those childhood strings, you know what I mean, when you're a kid. We like to take a walk down memory lane to the golden age of television, and because it's so gone nowadays, and unfortunately now it's just, technology has taken over the world, and some good and some bad as well. So that's our show.